including the Presidential Medal of Freedom and nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, and was inducted into the Space Hall of Fame in 1979 and the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 1998.
After retiring from the Navy in 1972, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to sponsor research into the nature of consciousness as it relates to cosmology and causality. In 1984, he was a co-founder of the Association of Space Explorers, an international organization of those who have experienced space travel. He's the author of Psychic Exploration and The Way of the Explorer, and has devoted the last 35 years to studying human consciousness and psychic and paranormal phenomena in a search of common ground between science and spirit.
As extraordinary as this career has been, perhaps his greatest contribution to the human experience is yet to come. For over 10 years, following in the footsteps of the late astronaut Colonel Gordon Cooper, our speaker has repeatedly asserted his view that the extraterrestrial explanation for UFO phenomena is the correct one, that Roswell indeed was a crashed extraterrestrial vehicle, and that the government is aware of this and has embargoed the truth from the American people.
And finally, the mainstream media is paying attention. In July of last year, a large radio audience in the UK heard these assertions for them the first time. The result was a media storm with over 200 interview requests, 50 plus articles, and a dozen television segments in the UK and the United States.
Playing the key role in ending the UFO ET truth embargo could well be the greatest achievement in the life of many achievements. PRG thinks so, and awarded our speaker the Hall of Fame Lifetime Achievement Award last year. At that time, he gave the 2008 keynote address. This year, PRG invited him to come and talk about the totality of his intersection with the UFO ET issue, the media response, the responses of his peers, and perhaps more importantly, his thoughts on the disclosure process and the post-disclosure world that most certainly lies ahead.
Please welcome Dr. Edgar Mitchell to XConference 2009.
Good morning, all. Good morning. And thank you for that overwhelming introduction. I have to write that down myself, so I need to. I'm a big picture person, and so this morning, very briefly, let's talk about the big picture. The 21st century that we're in, the 20th century was quite an amazing century, and the 21st is even going to be more. I think we will probably, in the 21st century, become a part of the community of planets that has intelligent life aboard. And it's about time. When I speak to young people, which I do frequently, and they're just beginning to study history and science in their early schooling, I try to set the stage in the following way. I point out that my great-grandparents went across from Georgia to West Texas after the Civil War, our Civil War, to start a new life in the 1870s. Railroads weren't completed across the South and the West. They went in covered wagons pulled by horses. Lights weren't invented. My father was born shortly after the Wright brothers made their first flight, and I went to the moon. So from covered wagons to going to the moon was the mark of the late 19th and 20th century. And before that time, as we all know, people walked, rode horses, camels, whatever they could tame. The ancient Phoenicians started exploring the waters of the Mediterranean in their frail boats 4,000 or so years ago. The South Sea Islanders in their dugout canoes were exploring the South Pacific, somewhere in that same time frame. Our parents' generation went into the air, and our generation went into space. Does that progression tell you something? And we have had rumors, and for a goodly portion of the 20th century, that we weren't alone in the universe, but no one believed that. Even when I went to the moon in 1971, it was the conventional wisdom, both in science and religion and culture, that we were alone in the universe. And we now know that is simply not true. But coming to accommodate that in the larger sense is what we have to do, and that's what this century, I believe, is all about. And we are a major part of that right here in this room. Those of us in this room are leading the way to help get that idea out and operant in our culture. I also like to tell the story to help move this along. And we do have a little bit of time left. But I like to point out that our star is a mainstream star and not much different than most of the stars in the universe. Has a finite lifetime. Our star is about halfway through its life cycle, which means it has about 4 billion years left. Now that seems like a lot of time to us, but in the life cycle of stars and the universe, it's not much. So, if our species is to survive, we have to be off this planet before our sun runs out. Now that's the big picture that I like to set up, because it's a part of our burgeoning science that we really didn't know at the beginning of the 20th century. The Big Bang idea of how all this came to be only began in the 1920s with Hubble's observing redshift. And it now looks like, and this is conjecture, it looks like the Big Bang is probably on its way out as a discussion or as a theory of how it all began. And it is very likely, and my team happens to be working on it very passionately, that the proper theory has to do with the steady state universe and the continuous creation of matter in the universe itself. And we will see how that plays out over the next decade or so, but I feel fairly confident that's what's happening. And if there's anything that should put a new light on this universe that we live in, or the universes if it's plural, and I really don't know how you define other universes, except maybe the laws of physics aren't the same everywhere, so that would be a proper definition of a universe, that the law has a consistent laws of physics. And it's not necessary that it's the same laws that we have here.